I'm so pleased to be here at Darien Library to talk about my book, Tolstoy and the Purple Chair, because my year of magical reading could not have taken place without a library. My year began at the library and was fueled by my weekly and sometimes twice weekly visits to the library. And I love to be in a library, and I'm so happy to be able to be here tonight and talk to you about my book, Tolstoy and the Purple Chair. Many people ask me about the title of my book, and I just want to tell you right away, I did not read War and Peace in one day. Tolstoy, but I read his last novel, which was beautiful. The Purple Chair part of the title is because I did a lot of my reading when I wasn't at the library and I was reading at home. I read in my purple chair. And my purple chair does not look anything like this purple chair. This is a beautiful purple chair. Mine is old and stinky and cat scratched and ragged, but it's very, very comfortable. And I did a lot of my reading there. The magical part of the title, my year of magical reading, comes from something that I think all of you will understand, because I assume you're all readers, given that you're here at the library to hear me talk about books. It talks about the magical part comes from the magic that we find when we open a book. I found so much magic. I found comfort, escape, and I learned lessons that I needed to learn at that time in my life. One of the books I read during my year of reading was Mr. Pip by Lloyd Jones. Mr. Pip is set on a fictional island in the Pacific. The island is caught in the middle of a territorial war, and the teacher in the small village has left, fleeing the conflict. One of the men who lives in the village, who's an outsider married to an insider, offers to teach the local children, although he's not a teacher. But how he teaches the local children is by reading aloud every day to them from Dickens' Great Expectations. Terrible things happen on the island, but one of the young girls of the village survives, and one aspect of her survival is Great Expectations. As she explains it, and now I'm reading from the book, Great Expectations was one book that supplied me with another world at a time when it was desperately needed. It gave me a friend in Pip. It taught me you can slip under the skin of another just as easily as your own. If that isn't an act of magic, I don't know what is. Another book I read during my year was The Book of Chameleons by Jose Eduardo Aguilusa. It's a beautiful book about memories, and it supposes the idea that if you wanted a new identity, you could purchase new memories and take on a new identity and escape your past. One sort of tiny, discreet chapter in the book tells the story of a man who is fed up with life. He's had it, and he wants to kill himself, but he doesn't really have the guts to do it. So he decides that he will go out and buy a gun and buy a bottle of scotch and buy a really crappy crime novel. Because he figures, I'll drink the scotch, read the novel, and be driven to shoot myself with the gun. So he gets all the stuff together in his room, and he pours himself a glass, and he starts reading. But it's not that bad. The book is actually pretty good. And he ends up staying up all night, reading the book to the end, and then falling asleep. When he finally wakes up the next day, he feels pretty good. A little hungover, but he just had a good read, and he realizes there are other books he wants to read, and suicide is averted by a book, by the magic of a book. Books are magic because they can do so much. They can mirror our own experiences and show us that we are not alone. They portray experiences that I could never imagine myself in, and yet by reading, I find myself in that place, and that time, and that situation, and I gain from that exposure. The magic that I found in books was not twofold or threefold or even tenfold. It was hundreds and hundreds fold. And that magic taught me how to live just when I needed most desperately to know how to live. It is a question we all ask ourselves at one time or another. It is a question that comes up most horribly and emphatically when someone we know and love dies. 6 years ago, my oldest sister died of cancer. Only 46 years old when she died, she lost everything that most of us take for granted. She lost time with her nephews, reading a new book, or walking in Central Park in New York City, where she lived. My initial reaction to her death was to try to make my own life doubly full. I was going to live double for her and for myself. I answered the question of how to live by living as fast as I could, cramming in everything that I could, both for my sister and for myself. I signed up for volunteer positions. I said yes to anyone who asked me to do anything. I tried to be there for every member of my family, my children, my husband, my other sister, my parents. Whenever, wherever they needed me, I said, yeah, I'll be there, I'll do that, I can do that. But after 3 years of ever-increasing activities and commitments and promises, I was like on a treadmill set to highest speed. I realized that I was not living a great life. I was still grieving, hurting, lost, and angry. And I wasn't living. I was racing away from guilt, pain, anger, sadness. The guilt was because I was alive and my sister wasn't. The pain and anger was because she was gone, and sadness because I could not bring her back. I needed to find a way to live for my sister, but not as an attempt to substitute my living for what she lost. I needed to live my own life worth being alive for, a life she wanted for herself and for me. I could no longer have her wisdom or her humor to guide me, but I could turn to a trusted source, books. Books, like my sisters and my parents, have been a part of my life from the day I was born. I was the youngest of 3 girls in a closely knit family, and we were all book lovers. One of my earliest memories is of going to the bookmobile that stopped just a few blocks from our house. I can still see it, silvery, boxy mirage, glowing above the heated asphalt street of a very hot Chicago summer. Inside the bookmobile, the air was miraculously cool. It was like a dark cavern lined with books, the dust motes floating by and the rays of light coming in through the narrow doorway. Kids' books were down low, and at 3 years old, I picked my books by sense of smell as well as by sight. Those tall, thin picture books, the oldest ones, they smelled so good, musty, but also with an underpinning of gasoline and cleaner fluid. Having chosen our books for the week, we girls toted them home, and there I begged until someone hoisted me up on their lap and began to read to me. It was magic. I discovered that magic early with my sisters by my side. As I grew up into adolescence, books continued to provide a role in my life. They gave me company when I felt lonely among my peers, and guidance when I needed to figure out how to behave as life became more and more complicated. I started keeping a diary of favorite quotes from books. Everything from "Tomorrow is Another Day" from Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell, to "People do not complete us, we complete ourselves" from Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. Through college and then law school, I turned to books when I needed escape or wisdom or a good laugh or a good cry. I remember sobbing through The Hunchback of Notre Dame and feeling that after experiencing what Quasimodo had to deal with, how bad could first-year law be? The magic of books. I had turned to before, and now I most desperately needed it again. As I approached my 46th birthday, the same age at which my sister had died, I came to understand that it was time to get off the treadmill of activity and sit myself down into a chair. It was time to sit down and read devotedly. My sister would have wanted it, and I most certainly wanted it. I decided to commit myself to reading a book a day for 1 year. it would be my one activity, not a million and one activities. My husband, Jack, suggested a book a week, but I said no, one every day. And not only would I read a book a day, I would write about each book I read to make sure that I really delved into what made the book tick, what the author was trying to convey, and what I had found in my reading. Of course, I still had 4 kids to take care of, a house, a husband, cats, laundry, garden, meals to shop for and cook. But for 1 year, I would make the focus of my days the chosen book of that day. I did it because I wanted to find some guidance on living. I wanted to have a year of pleasure and of escape and comfort. And you know what I found? No, I found magic. The magic of looking between the covers of book after book and discovering exactly what I needed. Books became my therapy, and it was an amazing course of treatment. I settled in and I settled down. Slowly and surely, I began to rise from my reading chair every day with renewed energy and a broader empathy and a wilder imagination. I made new friends, both on paper and in the people I met through my reading, authors and fellow book lovers in town and on the web, even friends I'd known forever I reconnected with now and in a different way. We talked about books. And in talking about books, we can talk about anything at all. It's magic. In Tolstoy, The Purple Chair, I present my year of reading, and I share the magic that I found. Looking at all the different themes that came up again and again as I read: sorrow, death, memory, forgiveness, intimacy, parenting, kindness, and connection. I share the lessons I found on how to live a full and engaged life. I hope that my book of sharing what I read and experienced and learned will be shared between many, many other people. We are all struggling to figure out how to go about this business of living and how to turn it into not a business but an adventure.